You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. So I came across this story that I thought was really interesting, where lawmakers in Evanston, Illinois, a small town outside of Chicago, have launched a $10 million reparations program for local African Americans, funded by profits from legalized pot. And when recreational marijuana sold from state licensed dispensaries becomes legal in Illinois next year, the sales tax will be applied to housing and education incentives to address the lingering effects of slavery. Joining me right now is Robin Rue Simmons, an alderman in Evanston, Illinois. So, first of all, housing and education incentives. So let's do this here. So explain to me, how did this come about? Like, whose idea was it? How did it happen? No way. So, all right. So here's this. So we have an issue. Let's do this here. We have an issue with your audio. So I want my audio folks to go ahead and get that straight. So we're not getting the feedback with your audio. Y'all let me know when it is fixed, please. And so, but we'll go my panel before I go back to the alderman here. Interesting idea.
I would have to see exactly how it's laid out, because I like the idea of reappropriating the funds for the low-income community. I don't know if you call it reparations
right.
in particular. And secondarily, I would like to see what are going to be the minority set-asides for those state licenses, because more so than giving me an apartment, give me one of those dispensaries. Give me access to that money.
Well, in Chicago, when they were actually seeing who was going to get those, virtually no black people were in the room.
So that's my question.
And that's one of the issues. One of the issues that I've raised in this show is that, okay, who was most impacted by these marijuana laws? African Americans. And my deal needs to be, in fact, in some states, black caucuses are holding up.
I'm doing so in Georgia right now.
Legalizing marijuana, saying, no, we ain't voting on nothing unless we guarantee that black folks have, to your point, a set aside there. Let me show.
So we'll say the Black Caucus in Chicago at both the city level and the state level are fighting very hard to make sure that there is availability and that black people are a part of the marijuana
But it's after
market.
it passed.
That's
your
true.
power is when before it gets passed. That's the problem. The law is in New York State. The reason it is not passed in New York State, because the Black and the Puerto Rican caucus said this bill ain't moving until we get this thing resolved. What happened in Maryland? They passed it and then were complaining after the fact because only one black dispensary, and folks were saying, hey, what about us? You gotta.
No, I agree.
You gotta use the power before
the strategy was wrong.
Right.
But I will say that even looking at Evanston in what they're doing right now, I agree with Kelly here. I would not call that reparations, but it makes for a very strong media talking point. But they are trying to give back to a certain extent. That's not even happening in Chicago, and it's not happening in a lot of other places. To Robert's point, the real buy-in is going to be black people having these dispensaries, black people having a stake in this business. And I think that we're still a long way in many states and localities that are passing marijuana legislation to seeing that actually happen. So yes, we're going to see a little bit of gimmies here, there, but we're not really seeing what really matters.
All right, let me go to Alderwoman Simmons. So first of all, explain what's the plan, how this thing come about?
Well, it came about because our disparities were in line with the nation in terms of our income gap, achievement gap, health disparities. I serve and was born and raised in a neighborhood that has 13-year less life expectancy, $46,000 less household income. And we have done a lot in our community in the way of equity and inclusion. We have a chief equity officer. We have other initiatives that have been very important, but it had not been enough to bridge the gap. And as I was working towards a local reparation, the same time the Illinois state was passing the cannabis legislation, and in that there was a commitment to social equity in the licensing, and I thought that I considered that a nudge to carry that same commitment into the tax revenue. I understand the barriers that are going to be before the minority community in accessing the licenses. I'm hoping that those barriers are reduced. But in the meantime, the revenue is coming. The tax is real. We approved a 3% city tax and we've set aside 100% of those funds to $10 million to start a local reparation fund. I agree, $10 million is not enough, but it certainly, in our city of 74,000, moves us past ceremony and apology and starts to give us some money to repair some of the damages done.
So it will go into a fund, and then what happens?
That is yet to be determined. We have an important community town hall meeting December 11th, next week. NARC, the National African American Reparation Commission, will be coming in from D.C. along with Danny Glover for us to continue that conversation and decide on what initiatives that build wealth and strengthen community and improve the infrastructure in the historically Black and red line neighborhoods we will approve for these funds, and actually who will be approved. So we have more work ahead of us, but it certainly was an important step for us to set aside $10 million to start the fund. The fund is open and accepting contributions from foundations, institutions, families. We've already received at least a donation from an important organization in town. And my hope was that this would start us in the right direction past apology and ceremony.
And so it passed 8-1.
Yes.
When you talk about using this tax, but also Evanston, to explain this, Evanston opting out of the state program. Explain, what does that mean?
Opting out of the state program, I'm not sure. We have accepted the cannabis legislation. We have one existing medical dispensary that will operate as a recreational dispensary starting on January 1. And we have approved 2 additional licenses. So those licenses are yet to actually be approved, but we have identified room for 2 additional licenses. So we plan to operate 3 recreational dispensaries in our city, and we fully plan to work with the social equity component in terms of the licensing.
So Evanston actually is in. Other Chicago suburbs have opted out. The city expects this to generate $500 to $700,000 annually, but it's going to cap at $10 million. Why the cap?
Well, it's a $10 million. It's a 10-year program right now. I agree. Maybe we should not have a cap, but we've been able to get it approved with a 10-year program. And the cap on $10 million, the first $10 million of the revenue. There's a lot more room for improvement, I'm sure, and I'm hoping that we will continue to improve this program. And we are very, very aware of the sensitivities of what is reparation. I don't know any dollar amount that can damage the repair to our community and our people, the crimes against humanity that we still deal with the impact today. But I am pleased with our city that we've made a very big step in the right direction. All
right, then. Alderman Simmons, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Kelly, I want to go to you. I think probably, so what's interesting about this, so it's being called reparations, but you're talking about housing and education, but they still don't know how it's going to work. And so I think to Amisha's point, putting reparations in it is getting the attention, but that's not necessarily what it is.
Yeah, I think that the word reparations, especially in this election cycle, is kind of like the code word for Black people are going to get something, or Black people are going to be considered. Last election cycle was Black Lives Matter. The election cycle before it was probably criminal justice reform or something equivalent. So I'm not necessarily harping on the fact that it's being called reparations. My concern is marijuana notwithstanding, the principle of the matter being you taxing the weed, the taxes or the proceeds going to us, right? And I caution how that's going to be structured, mainly because I'm looking at what Maryland did. Not necessarily, again, not talking about marijuana, but I remember when Maryland finally passed legislation regarding casinos, and the whole push regarding the casinos is like the we're going to get so much money, and that money's going to go to the school system, and we're going to rebuild Baltimore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened was, it's not that that money didn't go there. What happened was that the money went, but the budget was such that it basically broke even. So the money that was there before the casino money came in, that was being pulled out as the casino money was coming in, such that it was still basically the same amount of money being distributed to whatever the budget was being appropriated for that year. So what happens with that? So what happened is that, yes, the casinos, were passed, overwhelmingly so, because this was the promise made. And technically speaking, the promise was kept, but the effect was basically kind of like chilled.
My secondary issue, though, with this one is that Evanston is one of the most highly property-rich and valued areas in Chicagoland in general.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So for the argument to be that, some of the black kids or, minority kids in general aren't necessarily receiving the same, particularly in schools and housing, as some of the white kids, I really want to see what those numbers are, because by and large, everyone in that area is doing a lot better off than people in all the surrounding areas.
According to the city, the black-white gap financially is 46,000.
And on top of that, I would ask more so, what are they pushing their electeds for? Because at the end of the day, if you want a certain appropriation for your schools, you want it for your housing, this should have been done before you had, the backing or trying to push for this with marijuana legislation. You could have done this years ago. Where is the process of this coming about 5, 10, even 3 years ago, before this marijuana piece was ever actually...
And what's being taken away in lieu of this coming in?
And let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Good first step. I applaud them for doing so. I applaud them for recognizing racial disparity, but do work the details out. I think that's an important point, that we need to work out the details on how exactly this will work and what's going to be the criminal justice aspect of it. Are we going to be expunging people's criminal records for marijuana? Are we going to stop allowing people to, are we going to stop marijuana from being probable cause for searches by police officers? Those sorts of things I think should also be included in it.
You know what, though? So let me speak to that. So 420 Real Estate is one of our sponsors, and when I met with them, we talked. They wanted to have these town halls around the country, and they wanted to make expungement a big part of the deal. And I told them no. I said, now let me explain. I said, there are groups that are already doing that. Mm-hmm. I said, let those groups keep doing that. Somebody else has to talk about the money. Because let me explain. I think part of the problem, if anybody who saw my conversation with John Hope Bryant will understand this, is that one of the mistakes that I believe that we make as African Americans, and I said this when I hosted the State of Black America panel in Indianapolis, and I asked them the question, if you had to name the top 5 issues facing African Americans, money is not going to be in the top 5. We're going to say mass incarceration, criminal justice. We're going to say police brutality. We're going to say health disparities. We're going to say education, but not money. And I said somebody has to be focused on the money. Because, I mean, it's sort of like in the black community, whenever we're having these economic conversations, it's the NAACP, the Urban League, National Action Network, Rainbow Push. Not a single one of them have run a business. I said, are you going to talk about how do you build wealth? Talk to folks who do that, not folks who don't. If civil rights is your lane, that's your primary lane, focus on your primary lane. But the reality is that the money folks focus on this. So I would say in this initiative, these are city officials saying, how can we take proceeds from a tax and apply it to areas I've already mentioned, education and housing. Those two issues, that's their lane. Now, because the expungement part, the city can't do anything about that. That's a Cook County issue. That's a state issue. And so I just want, as we're moving forward, I want us to separate the two. I think we got to have clear and direct discussions. No, we here talk about money. the licenses, dispensaries, the contracts, the land. That's the money part. Over here, the expungement part, that's another part. And I think they're intertwined, but they still should be separated. If the expungement folks do what they do, and the money people do what they do, because what happens is the expungement part becomes the most important thing, and the money piece gets left aside. And then after we done the expungement, it's like, well, hell, how we gonna make some money?
But that's part of the reason I think that you kind of have to tie them, because we usually get one bite at the apple. So we're going to get something done for us. That if we do the money part first and then do the expungement part second,
no.
expungement will never happen.
No, what I'm saying is, they're operating in tandem. What I'm saying is, but the people who do the money part ain't the folks who should be doing the expungement part, because that's not what they do. That's the lawyers. That's the legal people. That's what they do. The money people should be training and educating our people on the money part.
Don't you know being a lawyer makes you good at everything?
No, player. No, they ain't gonna work. And I'm telling you,
I agree with you, though.
I mean, what y'all gotta say, I have seen this my entire career. People ask me to moderate a panel, and I'm like, ain't nobody on this panel with a business. Like, I love it when people have this, let's talk about entrepreneurship, and then I'm like,
who's qualified?
ain't no damn entrepreneur up here.
Right.
That's like saying let's talk about let's talk about the law. Ain't nobody a lawyer? I'm just saying. I just think sometimes that we really have some backwards conversations. And so what I encourage 420 Real Estate and these other people, I'm like, no. We gotta have people whose sole job is educating our folk on the money piece, because that's what some folks don't know. And that's a huge mistake I think we make a lot of times, where we don't elevate the money people. I told Ron Buzz with the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc., I said, you should never allow a discussion or a panel discussion to be held when they talk about black wealth and black businesses and y'all sitting in the audience. I said, stand up in the middle of that sucker and say, I don't know how in the hell y'all picked them people here, but somebody who is on the black business side need to be on a panel talking about black business. And that's just the one thing that just sort of drives me crazy all the time we do that. So hopefully, they got details to work out. And so, even though it's being called a reparations program, I think that's the sexy title, but that's not really what it is, because frankly, we really don't know what it is yet, because we just know some money is going to go into a fund that's going to be capped at $10 million over 10 years. Now they got to figure out what they're going to do with the fund.
Which is a good start.
No, absolutely. No, but it's how it goes back to, and I use them all the time in my speeches. It goes back to how you use to Maynard Jackson. His grandfather taught him the 3 B's: the ballot, the book, and the buck. How you use your political power to deal with economic power. And too often it's just been political power, not on the economic piece. And I keep telling all these different people how you have to use that. When I talked to the Maryland Black Caucus, I said, you should go back and say very simply, if you get a state contract, you should go to the banks where you deposit state money and say, banks, you should be supplying lines of credit to any business that has already been approved for a state contract. I said, that ain't race-based. That's state-based. That is what Jackson did, which allowed black businesses who couldn't float their businesses for 6 months because the city paid on 180 days to be able to still eat. But again, that's using political power, and too often a lot of political people don't understand how those RFP processes work, how the bureaucracy works. So we get excited about the elected official without realizing it's that bureaucrat who's really responsible for writing the rules and things along those lines. And that's just one of the things that we got to be able to focus on. All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, as the marijuana momentum continues, the folks at marijuanastock.org have already reached more than half of their funding goal for the hemp CBD investment. That's right. If you want to take advantage of this great opportunity, you need to do it now because it won't last much longer. Now, if you don't know, I'm talking about the hemp plant, the good cousin to marijuana, with a much higher concentration of CBD, which means hemp gives you all the medical benefits of marijuana without getting you high. Some of y'all like Damn, I want the high part. Also, if you don't know, hemp farming is now legal in the United States, creating one of the largest commodities worldwide. It's an investment opportunity that you could participate in, and the folks at 420 Real Estate want to help you. Their business model is real simple. They buy land that supports hemp CBD grow operations and leases it to licensed, high-paying tenants. That's right, they are hemp CBD landlords. And you can get in on the action. As hemp continues to change the economic landscape, 420 Real Estate is allowing you to chase the American dream. Now, what you can do is you can invest in their crowdfunding campaign for as little as $200. That's right, $200 up to $10,000. Now, you got to do it now before the fund closes. To invest, go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org. Get in the game and get in the game now. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.